John Bartunek. He is a priest with the Legionaries of Christ. He was ordained a priest in 2003, earned his doctorate in moral theology in 2010. He has taught moral theology at various ecclesiastical institutions at both the graduate and undergraduate levels. Father John is also an author. His most widely known book is called The Better Part, a Christ-centered resource for personal prayer. Father John also provided spiritual support on the set of Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, while researching the 2005 Catholic bestseller Inside the Passion, the only authorized behind-the-scenes explanation of the film. So please welcome Father John Bartunek as our second speaker today.
I too want to begin, just as the bishop did, by thanking all of you for the invitation to be here. When I was driving up here, I was thinking about what God was thinking, maybe what God is thinking about this morning. And then I was thinking about what the enemy, Bishop was just talking to us about the enemy, what he was thinking. You know, I am sure that there's one person who is very unhappy that you are here this morning. And that's the enemy of our souls, the devil. He hates when this kind of thing happens, because he knows that if you give God a day, God's going to give you something. God has some kind of grace in store for you today. Maybe you already got it, and you're just going to be savoring it and letting it sink into your soul. Maybe it's starting. He's going to give you something today. I don't know what it is. I know what I want to say. I know what I'm going to talk to you about. But God's going to give you something, and I would encourage you just to be open to receive it. It reminds me always of a situation like this reminds me of a story. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and there's a story there of an older priest years ago, kind of a curmudgeonly old priest, and he was given a homily at the beginning of Lent. And he really wanted to whip his parish into shape at the beginning of Lent, so he decided to give his first homily of Lent on death. That was the theme. Get right down to brass tacks. So at one point during the homily, he said, "Someday, every single member of this parish is going to die." Just like that. And everyone was kind of shocked. And then one guy in the second pew started to laugh. And the priest glared at him. He said, "Why are you laughing?" The guy raised his hand and said, "I'm not a member of this parish." So he was in the right place, but he wasn't really hearing the right message. So God has a message for you today. He does. There's no way that he's not going to give you something today. So you can be excited about that. I want to begin my talk with a question. Have you decided? Have you decided to be a saint? What we just received from Bishop Benecourt was a masterful presentation of basically spiritual theology. What holiness is, how we grow in holiness. And it can stir up a desire in our hearts. I would like to be like that. I would like to get there. But sometimes it can seem overwhelming. It's like, man, I've been trying and I don't see a lot of progress, and that might be too much for me. So the I would like is a desire for holiness. But it's not a decision. There's a difference between desire and decision. St. Thomas Aquinas, greatest theologian in the history of the church, had a sister. You never hear about her. She asked him once, according to Dominican history, St. Thomas was a Dominican. St. Thomas' sister asked him once, "Well, how can I become a saint?" And St. Thomas said, "You will it." That was one line answer. You will it. You decide. You decide. See, no one can do that for you. Not even God himself can make your decision to be a saint. Because God has given us this incredibly sacred gift of freedom. And he respects it. And this is the most important decision that we make. The most important decision, because let me tell you, there's only saints in heaven. And we don't get there by accident. You know, a squirrel does not have to decide to be an awesome squirrel. It's like programmed in there. It's instinct. We are given the gift of spiritual freedom, and if we don't decide to be an awesome human being, it doesn't happen. The most important decision we're going to make. Because the yearning that we have in our hearts for happiness and for fulfillment, and the yearning that we have in our hearts to make an impact on the world, and the yearning we have in our hearts to help those we love live a meaningful life, that yearning can only be fulfilled by becoming a saint. Because that's what we're created for. Now, maybe you have decided to be a saint. If that's the case, then this morning or today, this is a chance to renew that decision. Because we've got to renew it. I was just reading some of the writings of St. John Cassian, talking about some of the monks in the early centuries of the church. And there was a famous abbot who fell away and ended up breaking his vows and causing all kinds of scandal. And one of the monks that he had discipled was given a vision of the devils who had been involved in making that abbot fall. And the devil was coming to report to his superior devil, in the writings of St. John Cassian. And he reported that it took me 15 years, but I finally got to him. So there's someone who doesn't want us to make this decision and doesn't want us to follow through on the decision, and that's why we have to renew it. So if you've already made that decision, today you're going to renew it. Or I'd invite you to renew it. And if you have never made the decision, but you felt the desire, then today is your lucky day. The psychologists tell us that in order to make a real decision, like a decision that impacts our lives, at least two things are required. We have to have a clear idea of what we're deciding for, a clear idea, and then we have to have a clear idea of how we can make that decision practical. So my goal in my talk this morning at the beginning of this day, after having all of you experience the renewed desire for holiness, my goal is simply to help you get greater clarity on those two things. What actually am I deciding for when I decide to be a saint? And what is the practical way I can actually make that decision happen? Because if you get greater clarity there, then you'll be able to make this decision. And that's going to make the difference. It's going to unleash a new flow of grace in your life and through your life. You know, it's really easy to have, so I'm going to start with this first question. What actually does it look like in your life to be a saint? And it's not too late for anybody, by the way. If we're still here, it's because God still has work to do in our lives, and he has work for us to do. When he's done with us, he'll take us home. So the first thing, what does it look like in our lives to be a saint in your life? What is that supposed to look like? I want to start out with saying what it doesn't look like, because we have a lot of ideas in our heads that confuse us. All those ideas we get from reading the saint books when we're little kids and looking at the holy cards and having, sometimes those ideas don't mature. And when we think saint, we think of what we saw when we were 5 years old in a saint book. Saint Methuselah was born, got holy, did some miracles, and died. Very limited idea of sainthood. But sometimes we get stuck with that. So what is it? What a saint isn't? Being a saint is not performing a lot of miracles. You don't have to perform a single miracle when you're here on earth to become a saint. The only time the church looks for miracles is after you die and the canonization process begins, and then they look for miracles to confirm the holiness of life that the person lived here on earth. So don't think you have to go out and do miracles and create all kinds of big things and big stirs. That's not the essence of sanctity. Sanctity is also not having a lot of ecstasies and levitating and never getting distracted in prayer. So if you're thinking that I'm not going to be holy because I always get distracted in prayer, wrong reasoning. Saint Therese of Lisieux, doctor of the church, the little flower, she used to habitually fall asleep after receiving Holy Communion, right there in the chapel. You know, the holy moment of the day, I've just received our Lord. Saint Therese, doctor of the church, right? We stay human. So holiness doesn't mean that all of a sudden all my distractions go away and I'm levitating, I have ecstasies. No. That's not the essence of holiness. Holiness is not erasing your personality. God doesn't erase your personality and replace you with the holy card image. He created you to be you. And nobody else for all eternity will ever be you. And you will reflect God's glory in a way that no one else will for all eternity. So if you think that to be a saint, you've got to erase your personality, that's a lie. It's a lie from the devil that might be holding you back. One of my favorite saints is St. John the 23rd. Pope St. John the 23rd. Kind of a roly-poly kind of a guy, great sense of humor, really quick-witted. One of his issues throughout his life was he had a very sharp tongue. Very sharp tongue. He had a couple issues throughout his life. One of them he resolved. The sharp tongue one he never really resolved. So he's named Pope, and he wants to open up. He wants to kind of, open up dialogue and give a good impression. So he offers to do an interview with a journalist. First papal interview with a journalist in history. So the journalist comes in, asking him all kinds of questions, and at one point he says, "Okay, Holy Father, how many people work in the Vatican?" And John the 23rd thought for a minute, and he said, "About half." True story. Sharp tongue. Saint John the 23rd. So our personality is sometimes our cross, but it's also a gift that's going to be sanctified. You're going to be a saint the way that only you can be a saint. So it doesn't mean eliminating our personality. And finally, being a saint doesn't mean being impeccable. It doesn't mean that we always have the right answer. We always know exactly what to do. We never stumble. We never fall. That's not what being a saint means. One of the most comforting stories for me personally is one of the stories about St. Augustine of Canterbury, who in the 600s was sent by Pope St. Gregory the Great all the way from Rome. He was a monk in Rome. So he and a group of his monks, 12 of them altogether, they were sent to go and evangelize England, which had been invaded by all these barbarians and was really violent and a bad place. They wanted to Christianize it, re-evangelize it. So, they can't get on the train or the plane, so they make their pilgrimage from Rome to the English Channel, the French side of the English Channel. And they get there, these 12 monks, St. Augustine of Canterbury is leading, and he tells the people, the local people there, "Yeah, we're going into England, we're going to go across the channel, we're going to go evangelize the English." And the people on the coast say, "You're crazy. I mean, those people over there, they'll eat you. They'll torture you. I mean, nobody can handle it. They're unevangelizable. And you're not going to come back alive." So St. Augustine of Canterbury, being the perfect man that he was, said, "Oh, you're wrong. We're filled with courage, and we're going to go evangelize England." Right? That's what he said, right? No. He started quaking in his boots, and he took a couple days. He was in crisis, and he told his guys, "Okay, wait here. I'm going to take two of you. I'm going to go back and make sure the Pope wants us to do this." And he weighed his pilgrimage all the way back to Rome and said, "Pope, Holy Father, it's not really looking like a good idea. Maybe you want me to go somewhere else, right?" And Gregory said, "No, I want you to go to England." So then he walked all the way back from Rome to the English Channel, and finally they made their way over. He was afraid. He was uncertain. He was scared. And he's a saint. So sanctity doesn't mean all those things, being impeccable, having ecstasies, doing miracles, that's not what holiness is. So we got to get those ideas out of our heads. Because if we don't have a clear idea of what we're deciding for, we're not going to be able to actually make a decision. So what is it? What is being a saint? Being a saint is growing in grace through walking forward on the path of friendship with Christ. Walking forward on the path of friendship with Christ. If you're on the right path and you're moving forward, you're a saint. Some of the quotes that Bishop Betancourt read to us from St. Paul's calling the Christians in Corinth, and he's calling them saints because they're on the right path and they're moving forward. You know what Christianity was called at the very beginning in the book of Acts? 6 times. The new religion is called the way. Hodos, the path, the road, the path. And those who were following, the Christians were called those who were following the way. Followers of the way. You know what the first Christians called each other during the years of persecution? Because you couldn't say publicly that someone was a Christian, because then their neighbor could hear and turn him in, right? And he could be arrested and maybe even executed if he didn't deny his faith. So, nowadays we can talk publicly. At least for now, we can still say that. I can say, Philip Rivers, quarterback of the Chargers, is a great Catholic. I can say that at a cocktail party and nobody's going to arrest Philip Rivers. But back in the 200s or the 100s in Rome, if you said that about your neighbor or you said that about a public figure, they could be turned in and arrested. So the Christians came up with a code word to call each other. So if they're at a cocktail party, they want to talk about someone, Senator so-and-so, and he's a Christian, they would say, oh, he's a fellow pilgrim. They identified themselves as being pilgrims, followers of the way, walking along the right path in the right direction. That's what being a saint involves. That's the essence of it. It's growing in grace. The most popular image throughout the Bible of the righteous man, kind of the image of the righteous man, is a tree that's rooted in good soil right by the flowing stream, so it's always getting its nourishment, and that's growing and bearing fruit. It's the same thing as being on the way. It's a growing thing. It's a process. It's being on the way. And a tree, when it starts to bear fruit, it bears a little bit. And then another year passes and it grows and it bears a little bit more. And each year it bears more and more fruit. You're already bearing the fruit of the Spirit. And if you're on the right path and you keep moving in the right direction, then you're going to grow, you're going to produce more and more fruit. Fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. You've already got those a little bit at least. You want more, and the world needs more. So the point is, let's be on the right path and let's move in the right direction. That, I think, is a clear image, and it's a biblical image and a historical image of what it means to be a saint. I am walking on the path of friendship with Christ, and I'm moving in the right direction. And I'm moving with determination. Doesn't mean I'm not going to stumble. Doesn't mean I might not make a wrong turn. But the journey is going to continue. I'm going to decide to keep going. So I want to talk to you now that there's a clearer idea of what a saint is not and what it is, a simple core idea of what it is. Now I'm going to talk about what does that path consist of? How do I know that I'm moving forward on the right path? And how can I keep moving forward and maybe even move forward more quickly? And here I'm going to overlap a little bit with some of the points that Bishop Betancourt mentioned, but I'm going to present them in a way that I think is going to help you make this as concrete as possible so that your decision can be real and life-changing. So this image of the pathway, it's very interesting historically. At the time of our first Christian brothers and sisters, the first centuries of Christianity, you know that the Roman Empire had established a network of roads all throughout the Mediterranean. Incredible network of communication, with roads that were so well engineered that they're still being used today. Anybody here who's traveled to Italy or even other parts of Europe, you've probably used the very roads, the same roads that were created 2,000 years ago, built 2,000 years ago. Incredibly engineered, well-engineered roads. And these roads, these VA, had actually 5 levels. So they were actually 5 roads in one. What they would do is they would dig the ditch down to either the bedrock, or if there was no bedrock, they would just pack the earth, kind of the lowest level. So that was the first level of the road. Then they would fill that up with stones that were the size of the palm of your hand, or the size of your hand. Pretty big stones, and they would have a level of stones. Then they would put in a level of rubble mixed with lime. So it was kind of a rough concrete, either rubble from stones or from old concrete. So that would be the third level. Then they would put a fourth level down of fine cement, really good quality cement. And then while that was still wet, they would put the top level in, which were flagstones, but they weren't really flat. They were more like teeth. And so the root of the tooth would be in the wet cement. And so the stones that you actually walked on the road had their roots a little bit down deeper into the cement. So there's 5 levels. So when you are walking on those roads, or when you're walking on them today, you're actually walking on 5 roads at once. And when you look at the history of Catholic spirituality, we got a lot of it, 2,000 years, and more actually, earlier on, part of our history too. When you look at that and you kind of summarize what all the great spiritual writers and all the saints and all the great spiritual theologians, what they say about this path of holiness, you can group all the different means they give to us in 5 areas. And I'm not making this up. You can do the research yourself. If you have a few years. But there's 5 things, there's 5 levels, 5 simultaneous kind of areas of our life as Christians that if we keep them moving, we keep them in the green, then we're going to be moving forward and we're going to be growing and bearing more fruit. And each one of these 5 is very doable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 5, and I'm going to invite you as I go through each one. I mean, we could do a whole day just on each one separately, but I'm just going to go through each of the 5, and I invite you, as we're going through, to ask yourself, am I red, yellow, or green in each one of these? Red meaning, whoa, this is like either a terrible part of my life, it's just not going well at all, or it's completely absent. That would be red. Yellow would be, oh yeah, that's kind of part of my life, but it's kind of getting some dust, or it needs some repairs. And then green would be, yeah, that's a real part of my life, and that's kind of going. I've got that going. So do that analysis as I go through these 5, red, yellow, green for each one of them. And then at the end, sometime today when you go and pray, or during Mass later on, or even as you continue to hear the great talks coming up, you can choose one of the reds or yellows, and you say, I'm going to bring that up to the next color. And then when you get that red up to yellow, then you can move on, you can go back to a different red and get that one up to yellow. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a little memory trick to remember all 5 really easily so that you can constantly do a self-evaluation just to make sure that you're on the right path, moving in the right direction from now until the day God calls you home. Okay, so the first one, and by the way, if 5 sounds complicated to you, let me tell you, it's not. 5 is not complicated. Holiness cannot be complicated because everyone's called to it, okay? So it's not complicated. So the first is, and here I'm going to overlap a little bit. I won't develop it too much because the bishop really developed this very beautifully. The first level, the first of the 5, is prayer and sacraments. Prayer and sacraments. This is the objective contact that I have with God, right? When Jesus said, he said, in John chapter 15, he said, I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit. Because without me, you can do a lot of really cool things, but you can't get to heaven. That's what he said, right? Without me, you can do all kinds of interesting stuff and have a good time here on earth, but you can't get to heaven. Is that what he said? That's not what he said. He said, because without me, you can do nothing. A branch separated from the vine is a dead piece of wood. And the most objective way for us to stay united to the vine is a life of prayer and a life of living the sacraments. Prayer is so much more than just saying your prayers. You can actually develop a life of prayer, and your life of prayer is going to look different than mine. Because prayer, the essence of prayer, is a relationship with God, and your relationship is different than mine. So if you feel like you're red or yellow in this area, I wish I were you. Because you have so much to discover. There was mentioned in the introduction that I had the grace of working on The Passion of the Christ, that great work of art, that great movie which brought to life our Lord's suffering. Mel Gibson's movie. And there was an event, a little encounter that happened during the filming that is what I think of when I think of what the real essence of being committed to a life of prayer and sacraments really is. So we were filming. How many here have seen the movie The Passion of the Christ? Raise your hand. A lot of them. Okay, if you haven't, it's a great thing to watch during Lent. I could even spread it out, but most of you have seen it. So you remember the scene of the Last Supper, right, which they showed as flashbacks while Jesus is being crucified, to kind of make the connection between the sacrifice on Calvary and the sacrifice of the Eucharist, which was established during the Last Supper. So the Last Supper, beautiful. It's kind of a warm. It has this sense of fellowship and brotherhood, and Jesus is talking to his apostles, and they're celebrating the Last Supper, and really came out so beautifully. It really makes the Mass come alive when you see that sequence of scenes. Well, it was very hard to film those scenes, because what the director, Mel Gibson, wanted was Jesus had to be strong, but he also had to be very warm and understanding. He had to be encouraging of his apostles at the same time that he knew in just a few hours he was going to be crucified. So it's a very complex emotional kind of environment that Jesus had to communicate. So they had everything together and they're filming it and they do a few takes, and then Mel stopped and he took Jim Caviezel, the actor who played Jesus, took Jim aside and gave him some direction. And they took a few more takes and it still wasn't right. And Mel would never rest until it was right. So then he took him aside, gave him some more direction, did some more takes. It wasn't right. Everybody's getting a little impatient. Everybody's getting a little frustrated. It's taking forever and it's not right. So Jim, who was a good Catholic, good faithful Catholic man, and he had made a promise to God that he was not going to go in front of camera without having received Holy Communion, because he wanted people to see Jesus and not Jim. So that day he hadn't been able to go to Mass. So he had called up the priest who had translated the screenplay into Aramaic and Latin, and Father Bill, Jesuit priest from Los Angeles. He'd called up Father Bill and he said, "Father Bill, I wasn't able to go to Mass. Can you bring communion to me at the set?" And Father Bill said, "Sure." So Father Bill brought our Lord in the pyx. He brought the Eucharist, and Jim was already in costume and ready to start filming. And then he received Holy Communion from Father Bill right there on the set, which was always a little kind of unnerving. You kind of see Jesus receiving Jesus. Make some people uncomfortable, So he had received it. So Father Bill stuck around that day. And Father Bill still had the Holy Eucharist with him in his pocket, in the pyx. And Jim knew this. So Father Bill's standing in the back as they're filming the Last Supper. And everybody's getting frustrated, and Jim can't get it right. And so finally Jim just blurts out, "I want Father Bill to come and stand right in front of me right here while I'm doing this scene. Father Bill, why don't you stand right here?" And Father Bill's kind of like, whoa. Looked at Mel, and Mel said, whatever he wants. So Father Bill, and if you remember the way the scene was filmed, he could actually stand very close because it was kind of filmed from the side. The camera would go on the side and see Jesus talking to his apostles. And so Father Bill could stand almost right in front of where Jim was playing Jesus for this scene. Because Jim knew that he wasn't getting it right, but he wanted to, and he wanted to do it right, and he needed some extra strength, so he gets the Eucharist to come closer to him. He invites Jesus into that scene. He invites Jesus closer to him in the middle of his effort to do what God was asking him to do. And as soon as that happened, everything started to click. Everything started to click. And the results were what we've seen. So a life of prayer and sacraments, that's the essence. It's keeping Jesus close. He wants to be close. We have to keep inviting him. We have to keep cultivating our relationship with him. That's the essence of prayer and sacraments. And that's the first of those 5 levels. So are you red, yellow, or green there? Just make a mental note of it. And the second is mission. prayer and sacraments, and mission. Prayer is the foundation and everything, but another essential to our identity as Christians, essential to this path of following Christ, is engaging in the mission. The last words Jesus said before he went back up to heaven, go and make disciples of all nations. And he wasn't just talking to the priests. This is the essence of the church. St. Paul VI said, evangelizing, spreading the kingdom of Christ, is in fact the grace and vocation proper to the church, her deepest identity. She exists in order to evangelize. So we're all members of that church. So our deepest identity is building the kingdom of Christ. And if that's our deepest identity, that's where you're going to find the most meaning. And how do you do that? What are the fields of your mission? First of all, of course, your family. Second, your place of work. Third, your parish, your Christian community, and the world itself. That's where you're called to spread the kingdom of Christ. You have a mission in each one of those spheres of influence where you exist. And if we are praying, and we are hearing and listening to the voice of God in our hearts, and if we just are open, Lord, how do you want me to spread your kingdom today? Great things are going to happen. This is 12 years of this men's conference. It started because a couple men said, hey, I think we can do this. Think about how many hundreds and thousands of men have been encouraged in their faith because those first guys said, hey, I think God would like us to do this. So God may call you to do something big, but he might not. He may call you to give witness the way St. Joseph did without speaking a word in the Bible. But he was living his mission. So what is your mission and how are you living it? Are you aware that you can actually have your words and your actions have eternal repercussions? Because that's the amazing thing. Jesus could have stayed on earth and done all the work himself. I mean, he's God after all, right? But instead he decides to ascend into heaven and then hand us out portions of the work of building his kingdom. He decides to make us his partners. Because he knows that our hearts yearn for meaningful work in this world. And the most meaningful work that we have is to build and help build the only kingdom that will last forever. So we could talk a lot about the different ways this manifests itself. But for now, I just want you to go, am I red, yellow, or green here? How aware am I that my life is a mission, that I'm actually called to help build the kingdom? And don't worry about how to do it yet. Just how aware am I? Because the most important thing here is the attitude. If I realize that I am actually a missionary simply by being a Christian, then the Holy Spirit will take it from there. St. Francis of Assisi was praying before the crucifix in San Damiano outside of Assisi, wanting to do God's will, to discover his mission in life. And he heard Christ speak to him from the crucifix. You can still visit this crucifix in Assisi today. Jesus appeared on the crucifix and spoke to him and said, rebuild my church. And of course, what Jesus had in mind was reform the church. And the Franciscan order was born eventually, right? But St. Francis had no idea that he was supposed to found the Franciscan order. He just heard Jesus say, rebuild my church. But his attitude was, I want to do what God wants me to do. I want to do my part. So you know what he started to do? This little church of San Damiano was falling apart. The stones were falling off. The bricks were falling off. So he actually started rebuilding that church, literally. Working on the walls, putting up some plaster. And he got other guys in the town to do it. That wasn't what Jesus had in mind, but that was good enough. Because he wanted to do something. He was aware that he was sharing in the mission of Christ simply by being a Christian. So red, yellow, green. Stay there for a moment. I want to share an experience. I think the most important thing, just the attitude is what's most important. When Pope Benedict retired, and before the conclave where they elected Pope Francis, I was in Rome at the time. And that type of thing, those types of events always they end up sparking a lot of news coverage. So tons of journalists come into Rome, and they're always looking for someone to interview. So I was doing an interview about, why did Pope Benedict do this, and who's going to be the next pope, and what's the state of the church, all these interviews. I was doing an interview with MSNBC, that really good Catholic TV station. So there I was, and I was on a stool on top of the roof, and you can see the St. Peter's Basilica dome behind you. They always have a great setup with the camera. So you have cameramen over here, a producer, a really nice lady. The producer, I had gotten to know her a little bit. She'd encouraged me. I hate doing these interviews, because they just, what are they going to ask me? I don't know. And what am I going to say? I don't know. So she would really encourage me. So I'm sitting there waiting, and you got the earpiece in. You're talking back to New York, because there's also producers back in New York. And then we get this notice there's a delay. Something else had happened. There was breaking news. We had to delay the interview. So we're just sitting there. I'm waiting. Everybody's waiting. And one of the camera guys says, referring to the Basilica of St. Peter, which is right behind us, he says, hey, who are those guys standing on top of that church? Because you have these statues of the apostles on the facade of the church. So, who are those guys standing on top of the church? I said, well, those are the apostles. Oh, who are the apostles? What are those? I said, well, he asked, and we got time, so I started giving him the catechism, the history of the church, and answering his questions. And little by little, the other guys started asking some more questions. The guy from New York even started asking questions. So we're having this catechism session, this RCIA right there as I'm waiting for the interview. And it's so this producer, who I already had interaction with, she had come to Rome many times. This is one of the places that she would come for her work. And while we're having this conversation, this kind of idea started to bubble up within me, and I don't know where it was coming from. I actually had other plans that night, but I had to do it. So I looked at her and I said, hey, you've been here so many times. Have you ever been inside that church? And the producer, this lady, she just kind of turned white, kind of stepped back. No, I haven't. Well, would you like to go? And I'm thinking, who's saying this? Why? Would you like to go inside after we're done? I'll give you a tour. She kind of looked around and said, okay. She was an older lady, very experienced, and I don't even know why I said that. So we finished up the thing, and we go down, and one of the cameramen said, hey, can I come too? So three of us go down. We go into the plaza, and we go into the church, and I'm telling her all about it. And if you go into St. Peter's Basilica, it's just so beautiful. It's really mesmerizing. We went over to the right, and we looked at the statue of Mary holding the dead body of Jesus after the crucifixion, the Pietà by Michelangelo, one of the most beautiful works of art in the history of humanity. So we're standing in front of that. I'm explaining it to her, and I noticed that she's starting to cry. So I'm thinking, oh, man, I'm doing a great explanation. I'm going to nail it. So I keep going, rushing in, and then I notice, and she's just weeping, and I got to shut up. Something's going on here. So I just stopped, and I started to pray. And a minute and 2 minutes go by, and she stops crying, and she looks, and she smiles. Okay, Father, I think we can continue. So I continue the tour, but I just couldn't resist. I said, what happened? What was going on? And she said to me, well, Father, I haven't stepped into a Catholic church since I was 17 years old. So it's probably like 40 years later. And I vowed I never would. So I was in Catholic school, and then I got in an argument with my theology teacher, and she told me I was going to go to hell. I thought I would never step in another Catholic church again. So we started the talk. And that little visit became a turning point in her own spiritual journey. Now, I didn't know any of that when we were filming the little spot, but God did. So you may not know exactly how God is going to send you into the mission field. You may not know exactly what you're supposed to say or do, but if you are open and if you are aware that you're called to be a missionary, that's all he needs. He'll tell you, go rebuild my church, and you'll go put some bricks, and then he'll show you the way. Prayer and sacraments, mission is essential to the path that is our journey to holiness. Third, the third of the 5 layers of this road is what I call discovery. There is so much to discover, so much to learn about our faith. A treasure house that's been expanded over the last 4,000 years. God revealing himself, and men and women discovering all the implications of that revelation. Theology, philosophy, art, history, the catechism, there's so much to learn. How do we pray better? How do we grow? And how do we do this? How can I be a better father, husband, There's so much out there. Are you filling your minds with that? Are you going back to the spring and dipping back into it on a regular basis? Because the devil doesn't want you to. But there is power in the truth that God has revealed to us. And that power, Jesus said, will set us free. The truth will set you free. So if we keep dipping into that and going deeper and learning, you'll never learn it all. You don't have to learn it all. You just have to keep dipping into it. Then your interior freedom is going to grow as well. I had a powerful experience of the power of the truth. I was coming out of a pharmacy in Rhode Island a couple of years ago. Coming out, strip mall, big parking lot. Came out of the pharmacy. I was in my collar. There was a lot of cars in the parking lot. It was a sunny day. And I'm walking to my car that I was using, and out of the corner of my eye, I spot some movement. And I see this guy. I look over, and I see this guy, coat and tie, and he's running through the parking lot, like the old O.J. Simpson commercials, remember, in the airport? He's just bucking, and he's coming right towards me. I'm thinking, whoa, this could be a crazy guy. So I kind of speed up. Maybe I'll get to my car in time, and I get to and I said, no, okay, let's see. So he's sure enough, he's coming right to me, and he gets to me breathless. He says, Father, can I talk to you? Sure. Calm down. What's going on? He says, Father, I was just sitting in my car. I had my head on my steering wheel, and I was just begging God because I need some help. I was just begging. And then I looked up, and I saw you. No pressure or anything, right? So there I am. And I said, sure, what's going on? He says, my mother just died. And she'd been sick for a long time, and it was a degenerative sickness, and I really did the best I could. I wanted to do what was right for her. And the doctors, they didn't understand Catholic teaching. I went to my priest. I really tried to do what was right, but I'm not sure I did. And it's killing me. And I could see the agony in his face. He was just distraught. And I said, okay. Let's go through, tell me from the beginning, step by step. Of course, he didn't know this, but my doctorate is in moral theology, right? So I understand all the teaching of the church. It's like God knew this, right? So we go through. So we're standing there in the parking lot for 45 minutes, and he's going through step by step, and I'm asking questions every step of the way. And each step that he had to make a decision, I'm explaining to him what the teaching is about that issue, and every step of the way, he had actually made the right decision. And I was able to explain to him why it was the right decision. And as we talked, I saw the weight of that angst just dissipate. At the end of the conversation, he just gave me this big hug right there in the parking lot. Father, thank you so much. And it was just the power of the truth of the doctrine that we have received from Jesus Christ, the creator of the universe. So if we're not dipping into that, we are cutting ourselves short. And we're not moving forward on the path as quickly as we can. We got to keep dipping in, just keep learning. Discovery of the truth that God has revealed to us. The fourth layer on this path is what I call intentional growth in virtue. Virtue comes from the Latin word for man, vir, and for strength, virtus. Virtue isn't something I put on from the outside. Virtue is the growth and development of the powers that are already built into my soul. The healthy development of the powers in my soul make me virtuous. Picture that tree again. The tree has in its DNA the power to create, to grow, to spread, to bear fruit. So we have powers in our soul that help us interact with the pleasures of the world, the pains of the world, other people. And these are the virtues: temperance, justice, courage, prudence. So am I growing in virtue? And it's very easy to kind of do this. You don't have to overcomplicate it. Where do I keep falling? Where do I keep seeing my weakness? Well, that's a place where I could grow. But I got to be intentional about it. Because again, we're not squirrels. Squirrels don't need to train in order to learn how to climb trees. But we have to be intentional about being, for instance, more patient. I knew a guy, professor, up in Canada, lived in Canada, Western Canada, and he was having trouble because his work was stressing him out, and he would go home and he would take it out on his family. And he tried to work on it and tried to make some progress, and he just wasn't making any progress. He was getting discouraged. Talking it through, what am I going to do? He says, I've got to do something about this. Well, it turns out he had a long driveway. So he started saying, okay, well, I'm going to do something about this. I need your help, Lord, but I'm going to do something. So when he would get home from work, he would stop at turn on the driveway and just stop right there. And he created a little ritual that he would do to transition from work to home every day. A little bit of prayer, a little bit of repentance, right there in the car in the driveway. He would just pause, 5 minutes, sometimes it was 10. But he created his own personal ritual to transition from work to family. He was being intentional, not just complaining, not just getting stuck, not just being discouraged, but being intentional about making a difference in his own life. And we can do this. Intentional growth in virtue, picking something and growing. And finally, the fifth layer is what I call fellowship. Fellowship. The essence of fellowship is meaningful relationships built around Christ. And they can come in so many different ways. And when we make this a priority, God is there in a powerful way. Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, he said, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. We're not meant to journey alone. We're not meant to be lone rangers. We're not meant to be Shane, coming into the town, killing the bad guys, leaving, doing it all on our own, cowboy hero. That's not Christian. We are meant to journey together, just like the apostles, just like Christ. Fourth station of the cross, Mary encourages Christ. Fifth station of the cross, Simon of Cyrene helps him carry his cross. Sixth station, Veronica comforts him. If Jesus couldn't carry his cross alone, why do we think we can? We're not meant to journey alone. We're meant to walk together, to share this journey. This is one of the hardest ones for me. I grew up without religion, broken family, divorced parents, unstable. Sports was kind of my savior. I was going to be a sports. My dad had been a professional athlete. We loved sports. Actually, my dad started me reading Westerns when I was 9 years old. That's why I say the cowboy hero thing, just the cowboy hero. He's just going to kill all the bad guys all by himself, So that was kind of what I had in my head. And I joined the seminary and I figured I was going to be a cowboy hero priest. Wherever you send me, I'm just going to shoot the devil down and clear out the town, That's going to be my vocation. Well, I've had to learn. I'm still learning. I'm not called to do it alone. I was in Rome, I'll finish with this. I was in Rome a different time doing another interview. News interview after some of the scandals broke, the priestly scandals. And I just went, I don't like doing these, but at least I love the church, right? So if I do them, someone is on TV who loves the church. So I'm doing this interview with this guy, news reporter, who's back in the States, kind of connected through the satellite, and he just starts to lay into me. He says, Father, where does the church get off telling people what to do about marriage and sex? I mean, you guys don't even have sex. You don't know anything about this. All right. Oh, gee, well, let me explain. He wouldn't even let me talk. He said, all you priests, all these abusers, they should just get rid of celibacy and they should, and I try to respond to that, and he dives in with something else. And he's just getting more aggressive, and my stomach is just turning in knots. And, I'm getting so upset. And I can't really lash back. That would be the worst thing, right? For a priest to lose his temper and just lash out, that would be the absolute worst thing. So I'm kind of trying to stay controlled and trying not to cry and trying not to lash back. And it was the worst I've ever done. I felt terrible. So I finally finish, I survive, and I come back home, and it's lunchtime. So I sit down at the table there with the other fathers, and the guy across from me could see I was upset. He said, hey, what's wrong? You okay? I said, no, I'm fine. Thinking in the back of my mind, right? Cowboy hero, I can handle this, I can do this. And he says, a couple minutes later, he says, no, man, what's wrong? Something's wrong. And so I just told him, I said, man, I just did an news interview, and this is what happened. And I still remember the conversation because the first thing he said to me is, you were on TV and you didn't even tell us? We would have watched. Why don't you tell us this stuff? It's like, he's my brother. He cares, right? But I was like, no, I got to do it myself. Doesn't really matter. I'm just solo here. And then he said, what was the name of the guy interviewing you? I can't remember now, but I remembered at the time. And I told him, he says, I know about that guy. He was abused by a priest when he was a boy. And now he's gay, married with his partner, and an advocate for all these other causes. And just hearing that relieved all the pressure. That's why he was so upset. Because he has a lot of wounds. And it wasn't really about me, it was about he was just getting it out. And it helped me so much just to hear that. We're not meant to walk alone. We're meant to lean on each other. We're meant to journey together, just like the apostles. So fellowship. So I promised I'd finish by giving you an easy way to remember all of these 5. It's very simple. 5 fingers on your hand. Prayer and sacraments keeps us close to the heart of Jesus. The thumb is closest to our heart. We want to keep our heart united to him. The pointer finger, you point and you say, go, go make disciples. That's mission. We're called to go out and make disciples and make a difference and build the kingdom. The middle finger is the tallest. Discovery. Seek the things above. Seek the truth that enlightens all darkness. Keep seeking it. Keep seeking the things that are above. The ring finger is the weakest finger. Intentional growth and virtue. Hey, where am I weak right now? Where do I need to be stronger? And how can I do that? And then the little finger. By ourselves, we're alone. But as Ecclesiastes says, a rope of 3 strands is hard to break. Together with others, we're strong. Have you decided? Have you decided to be a saint? We have a clearer idea of what it means. We have a clear idea of that path. And now is the privileged time to make the decision. To make the decision. I've been praying for you ever since I committed to coming here. I'm going to keep praying for you. I thank you for your attention. God bless you.